I think we will approach games with different levels of expectations with regards to what we're going to get out of it and what's going to happen at the end. Maybe you want to play a game that doesn't end, at which point I'd question why this video is relevant to you. It isn't, like, at all. There's a billion battle royales waiting for you, why are you here? But the more traditional approach is for a game to have a satisfying conclusion that wraps everything up in a nice, neat little bow so you can go off into the world feeling good about yourself. At least for a short moment. Except, that's really boring, and so many games do that. I want to challenge myself and see how confused I can feel. Bittersweet endings are the perfect blend of some kind of victory over an evil threat, but at a significant cost that hangs over the epilogue and kind of ruins most of it. I think there's a fine balance between something being bittersweet and one of the other more extreme variations of happy or sad, and finding the steady medium is just one of my tasks today. Alongside trying not to talk about the numerous other mildly depressing games I've mentioned in recent videos. At this stage, I guess you could say I'm developing a repertoire. You can cover a very wide spectrum of endings when you're specifically looking for bittersweet examples, because every victory has some kind of cost associated with it. It's what helps promote growth and a sense of development within a character. So really, all you're looking for is how big that cost can get, and if the player and the protagonist can deal with that, if they're okay with that. You know, maybe you just don't care, but damn, that's cold. You know what I really like seeing in a game? Oh, many things. We could be here for a very long time if that's the question of the day, but for this topic, it's one thing specifically. An ending that doesn't necessarily come out of nowhere, but let's say the progression of a story from a general feeling of optimism that results in an ending where everything doesn't go quite as smoothly as you'd like it to. With a lot of infamously depressing games, you can telegraph the tone of the ending from how the rest of the game does its business, because you're not given a ton to hold on to in the hope that all of these conflicts will be resolved. I like a game that gets there gradually without an oppressive tone in the foreground. And to the average onlooker who perhaps hasn't played every single Ace Attorney game, you could convince them that everything works out just fine for all of these characters. Does providing false hope make you a bad guy? Guilty as charged. The third game, Trials and Tribulations, introduces God's second favourite son, Goddo, whose sarcastic demeanour, unpredictable reactions, and incredible dependence on coffee quickly marks him as a fan favourite and as a character who often steals the limelight away from good guy Phoenix Wright. Like, he really enjoys coffee, I can't stress that one enough. He quickly becomes that kind of enjoyable rival that someone like Miles Edgeworth can't quite match up to, and Goddo deliberately pushes Phoenix to bring his A game to every trial. There's a reason for that, because Goddo's only here to test out Phoenix Wright's abilities since he wants to determine if he's worthy enough to succeed Mia Fey, Phoenix's former mentor and Goddo's former lover. She was killed while Goddo was in a 5-year coma, and now he wants revenge. So much so that he kills Mia's mother while she's possessed by the woman who put Goddo in a coma. It's very complicated, you see. But the point is that Phoenix eventually determines that Goddo is guilty, which both condemns Goddo to prison for his crimes, while also allowing him to see clearly for the first time since Mia's death and easing his troubled conscience. Phoenix Wright has proven himself as a great lawyer, which is wonderful, but also one of the best characters in the entire franchise is now in prison for the murder of an innocent woman. Goddo ends up as a tragic character who had everything taken away from him and hastily jumped at his chance for revenge. I will gladly pour one out for that. Horror games have one of two types of endings to them. Either you overcome this terrifying evil that's been plaguing you your entire journey and, I don't know, triumphantly ride away in a helicopter, or everything goes to shit and you just have to kind of wash your hands of it and say, there's nothing that could be done, it was doomed from the start, what do you want me to do about it? So, you know, it's one of the other. By saying that, am I in fact insinuating that there might be a compromise or some kind of middle ground? I could be. And this is where psychological horror games lift themselves above any other subgenre of horror, because they pose scenarios where a 100% happy sunshine no one dies ending is highly improbable. You wouldn't expect it to either if you're being exposed to a selection of humanity's worst traits. Anything other than a downbeat ending would feel artificial and disingenuous. It reminds me of what my dad used to tell me. It was always something about, if you're enjoying this video and want to see more like it, then make sure to hit subscribe and the little bell icon to get notifications about a new video going up. I never understood what he meant by that, but what I'm trying to say here is that Silent Hill 2 is sad and depressing from start to finish, with numerous endings that fit the bill very nicely. Except maybe the dog ending. That's a little too strange for my tastes. Everything about Silent Hill 2 is set up to choke the happiness out of you, so any ending to this game that offers up even the faintest glow of fulfillment is welcome and relevant for me to talk about. Handily for me, Konami never settled on any one of these being official canon, including the goddamn dog in the control room! So all of these endings have equal significance? Is that what I'm saying? Okay, well, most of these are open to a little interpretation, but just know that the big twist near the end of the game is that James Sunderland actually euthanized his dying wife, and the town of Silent Hill is a manifestation of his attempts to deal with both the guilt and the loss of his wife Mary. The main three endings all fall somewhere on the spectrum between taking and surrendering control, with James leaving Silent Hill in most of them and drowning himself in the other. I feel the most bittersweet of the three is the Maria ending, where James attaches himself to this creepy version of his wife and has seemingly moved on in some capacity. He's accepted responsibility for his actions and is now doing what he can to live his life to the fullest. It has the hallmarks of a good ending, but then in the last seconds, Maria lets out a cough, James tells her to do something about that in a slightly malicious tone, and yeah, she's gonna die as well, isn't she? Even more depressing, Maria's probably gonna die as a mercy killing by James's hands, proving that he isn't really over anything at all. Something, don't learn from history, doomed to repeat it? This is the kind of ending I signed up for. I like this topic a lot because it covers an interesting niche that I haven't quite been able to discuss in other videos. Recently I've talked about sad endings or shocking moments, but by nature, this is a lot more complicated and harder to define. You can finish a game and not really know how to feel about what you've done for the last couple dozen hours and how it all panned out in the end. You start asking yourself, was it worth it? Was that the kind of ending I wanted at the end of this game? Looking back, I've made a lot of videos about the ending of The Last of Us and how I reacted to a conclusion that asks a lot of questions in a particularly negative way. Characters do things, and at the time, I didn't really agree with them. Nowadays, I think I've mellowed out a bit. Lots of people die at the end of The Last of Us, and to the average player you might have a good argument for saying that most of them did not deserve it. But that's kind of the point of The Last of Us. You are inhabiting a world where, on a regular basis, things happen that aren't exactly fair, and people die who probably didn't really deserve it. And that's okay. It does take a little while to get to that conclusion, though. The short of it is that the main character Joel is happy with his companion Ellie being used to create a cure to the zombie virus that has been running wild for decades, but not so much when the process by which to do so involves Ellie's death because of removing a part of her brain. Something messy like that. Joel fights back against the group who are trying to find this cure, killing a bunch of people, including the doctors if you're a genuine psychopath, rescuing an unconscious Ellie and driving her to safety. A confused Ellie later asks what happened, at which point Joel kind of lies and says they couldn't find a cure, and Ellie's like, okay. With that same level of uncertainty and almost reluctant acceptance that Joel may have killed a lot of people to protect her, something that he's been doing throughout the whole game, but now, I don't know, it's a little more contentious and not as morally innocent. It feels like an ending that focuses more on living for yourself and the ones you care about instead of being too concerned with the plights of others, which is neither morally sound or morally bankrupt. The Last of Us ends right after this, and it seems like there's a fairly sizable time jump to the sequel, so we're unlikely to get any proper closure on this, but it certainly isn't a completely happy ending, even if it did effectively guarantee a sequel. I suppose that's pretty good. I do have a voice in the back of my head that tells me that I should be talking about a specific game, or maybe I shouldn't talk about the same 25 games on repeat until I die, but sometimes I talk about something that is a little too perfect for one game in particular, and I weigh up the options. I think, is there any reason why I shouldn't talk about a game, and I just do it. You can't fucking stop me. To be fair, I haven't talked about Metal Gear in any capacity since March, and you'd have to go even further back to find a time when I wasn't talking about hunger-induced motion blur, the video game! I talk about these games a lot because they mean a lot to me, and that they often have enough variety to them that I can rely on them for most topics, but Bittersweet Endings is a staple, frankly. I'd be doing this franchise a great disservice by not bringing it up in this video. None of these games end with what most people would consider to be a happy ending, ranging from the incredibly depressing, to the broadly happy until future games ruin it, to the genuinely shocking and mildly stupid, to the Like most problems in life though, the answer lies by looking at Metal Gear Solid 3. Unlike a lot of other examples, endings to Metal Gear games are separated by the amount of optimism present, and in that case, MGS3 does a fairly decent job of at least congratulating you on completing your mission. This is the game that made the original Snake into a war hero who stopped the tyrannical Colonel Volgin, destroyed the Shagohod, and prevented a nuclear war, which are all things that contribute to Snake receiving a medal and a hero's welcome back in the USA. The downside, unfortunately, is that in order to do this, Snake had to kill his long-standing mentor who had defected to the Russians, but actually, the boss was forced to betray her country, by her country, so she could play the double agent and secure a fuckload of money. It's some sneaky political shenanigans that ultimately leave Snake disassociated with governmental oversight, that leads him down a path of vigilantism and ultimately becoming kind of a bad guy. The repercussions are big and tragic, but every other part of MGS3 really lets you enjoy your success. Taking down Volgin and the Shagohod is awesome, and something you can have a great deal of pride over. In the moment, it's cool, but the more you think about it, oh shit. Things went badly, didn't they? At least it's not some bullshit about a doctor this time. It took me a while to finish Persona 5. It's a great game and one of the best examples of the genre, but I would play a couple of chapters, gradually lose interest, before coming back and repeating the process. This went on for the best part of half a year, and I think the interesting part isn't so much that I stopped playing Persona 5 because it's a long game, and 2017 was a great year for new games, it's the fact that I returned so many times. When you play a game for that long and it keeps giving you things to do, you develop a greater appreciation for the world that it's trying to build and the characters that occupy it. You reach the end of this huge quest, and yeah, that is a very bittersweet feeling of accomplishment tainted with an air of finality. The characters who you've come to love have nothing else to say, and you'll never experience this game in quite the same way again. Persona 5 does this extremely well. Persona 3 does it even better. So where are the main differences that clearly lifts one game above the other? Well, there aren't a ton, and both games do a fantastic job of achieving what they set out to do, but Persona 3 takes a different approach by virtue of what happens in the finale. A ridiculously powerful entity wants to destroy all of humanity, but you've got protagonist powers! And they're pretty good in these kind of situations. So you save the day from Nyx, but doing so drains the protagonist of their strength, which results in them perishing shortly after graduation. The majority of the main cast also lose their memories of the Dark Hour, only regaining them as you lay dying. It's an odd 1-2-3 of being forgotten about, then remembered, and then leaving a world behind forever. Which is very sad, but also kind of okay. Because it shifts your focus from one of solemnness over relationships being reset to a gradual acceptance of the inevitability of death and loss. We're getting into some seriously heavy shit now, but this is a theme that Persona 5 skirts around, but Persona 3 tackles head on. The timing of your friends remembering who the protagonist is shortly before the death of the protagonist is so perfect that the mere sight of memories returning is enough for the main character to pass away peacefully. On their deathbed, the protagonist, and let's be honest, the player, was given reassurance that they did in fact have a positive impact on a lot of lives and that they will be remembered long after they're gone. And this is a realization that someone might be able to tell you at some point in life, but immersing yourself in a game that allows you to reach this conclusion on your own is just about the best way to do it. Time may be short, but it sure as hell ain't pointless. This is RabbidLuigi, and I think part of the appeal of the Persona games, at least from my standpoint, is that they are not shy about really pushing some very serious and very real issues to the forefront, and it does it in this wrapper of anime comedy, goofy antics, but it's also got some real heart and some genuine thought behind it. I can't think of too many games where the takeaway is to live your life to the fullest and to leave a positive impact on the people around you. It isn't all about you, it's what you leave behind. Have you got a topic that you'd like me to talk about next week? Make sure you leave a comment about that down below, because I'll be taking the most interesting suggestions and making a poll on the next video. In fact, here's one right now that I prepared from last week. I'll be revealing the winner of the poll on Twitter and taking suggestions for games to talk about that are related to that topic. So feel free to follow me over there so we can keep in touch. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.